Welcome to the Dungeon of Bad Decisions. This is the 35th installment of Anna Attempts to Explain Things. I'm your host, Anna.
And I'm John.
And this week's topic is First Edition versus 5e, more or less. Alright, so John, who are you? Why are you relevant?
Because I'm old. I've been around since First Edition. And have played all the editions in between.
John was technically my first DM because you were so desperate to game in any way, shape, or form that you were willing to run a buddy campaign for your 7-year-old daughter and her friend. As you guys can guess, that didn't go very well, or last very long.
Well, great.
How many sessions did we get through?
A handful, but it was a lot of fun.
For you, maybe.
Well, look at the lifetime of
You're
D&D
also
that
the
has
reason
set
I
you
can't.
upon.
Yeah, no, that was college actually. You can
Fine.
blame Michaela and Taylor for that. You're also the reason I can't stand gelatinous cubes. The only enemies we ever encountered were gelatinous cubes and skeletons, and to this day, I still have a visceral hate reaction to gelatinous cubes, which my DMs know and make fun of frequently. I have a ranger who actually whose favorite enemy is an ooze. So this is your fault.
Okay, I'll live with it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyways, so what we're going to discuss is basically first edition versus the newer editions. John, as, you know, an old person, I guess, is how he introduced himself. So we discussed this a little bit earlier off camera, but you were talking about roleplay versus the mechanics.
Well, each of the editions has been pretty different from the last one. First edition, I don't play First Edition anymore. I'm not one of these classicists who, goes back and gets a group of old people together to play First Edition for nostalgia. But, I am still nostalgic about First Edition. First Edition, there was very little attempt for balance. It was sort of going for the gritty reality, within the fantasy realm, but the reality around... it was based off of Lord of the Rings.
Really?
And in fact, well, it was certainly based off of love for Lord of the Rings and the halflings, hobbits. I think in some of the pre-first edition stuff, they were still calling them hobbits, and D&D used to get into a lot of trouble for copyright infringement in general. Like anyone who has done any collecting and knows around the first edition of deities and demigods, and they were copyright infringing the Cthulhu mythos and that one, and so on. So, yes.
It's a mythos.
Whatever. But the point is that it was a world, of Gandalf. It was a world where there was only 1/20th level wizard. Wizards they weren't supposed to be balanced at first, second, third level, with fighters or any other class. Young wizards died. And it was the very rare wizard that got up to a high level. So the different classes were very different power levels at, a similar experience point. But it was a great game. First of all, it was the new thing. D&D came out of nothing. Everything... all the role play genre really followed D&D. So growing up with D&D First Edition, it wasn't choosing D&D over one of the many other things out there.
Because now if you want to play, Lord of the Rings, there's an entire tabletop system for it.
Right.
There's at least 2 or 3 tabletop systems for Call of Cthulhu.
And every genre, whether it's superheroes, whether it's cyberpunk, whether it's whatever, Shadowrun, I haven't played much Shadowrun, but Shadowrun has been a favorite world of mine, just in terms of enjoying the setting and so on. But again, the D&D really started it all. And First Edition, for all its flaws, it was fun. Second Edition built on that a little bit, added some new mechanics, but it was very transitional. And then really, I think,
took
came
off
into
with
its
third.
own, right, really came into its own with third, and especially, 3.5, correcting the mistakes they did by not playtesting third edition before putting it out there.
Pun's one of those more famous mistakes.
Yeah.
There's also a butt ninja that I heard about that you can do in third. I think it was still possible in 3.5, I'm not sure. But the squeeze mechanics, plus rogues and halflings, meant that basically, if you did it right, you could make a halfling rogue that could fit into a diminutive size hole, which for scale is approximately the size of a human asshole or a large creature's asshole. So what somebody figured out was that they could, if at the right level, they could hide in a party member's butt in between rounds and pop out, shoot an enemy, get their sneak damage because they were completely concealed, and then go back in. And then do it over and over again.
Yes, clearly this must have been during a time when I was taking a hiatus from D&D.
Yeah.
So, I know this was billed as first edition versus fifth edition. I see we're creatively
That's why I said more or less.
skipping fourth edition, which was
fuck fourth edition.
well, it was nice what they tried to do in terms of blending tabletop tools and so on. Their heart was sort of in the right place, but
their brains were not.
Well, they dumbed down the tabletop game, and instead of taking a really good tabletop game and doing the best they could to transfer it to computer, they did very simplistic, basic stuff on computer, and then sort of novelized that into a game, and the game stunk. And
well, what they were trying to do was attract Magic the Gathering players. Problem with that was they already had Magic the Gathering already has a huge overlap with D&D, and they were trying to, I guess, make it easier for Magic players to transition to D&D. But what they wound up doing was just offending everybody.
Yeah, and letting Pathfinder take off with the 3.5 rules.
Mm-hmm. Pathfinder came out before 4th edition.
Oh yeah. I mean, Pathfinder was essentially started as an extension to 3rd edition and 3.5.
It's frequently known as 3.75. So.
But 4th edition was such a disaster that that D&D lost half its base. I mean, D&D for a generation or more had a loyal fan base, and they didn't want to move to the 4th edition rules, and Pathfinder was still publishing stuff for 3.5.
And it was less broken and a little bit more streamlined than 3.5. So, I mean, the first time I played 3.5 was after I played Pathfinder, and I didn't realize that Perception was actually a bundled version of look and listen skills. So I was playing a catfolk with no ranks in listen. I'd only put them in look or spot or whatever it was because I didn't realize that there was another one. So I was a catfolk who was basically deaf.
Yeah. Well, that can lead to some creative role play too.
It was definitely interesting. That was the same campaign, I think, where we wound up our wild mage wound up damage proofing a colossal centipede against everything but fire damage. Because one of the effects, because he had a feat, because you roll for a random effect every time you use wild magic. And so he wanted, a beneficial effect, and he had a feat that allowed him to reject the first 2 effects if he wanted, but he had to take the third. So he rejected the first 2 effects of this one. One of them was something relatively harmless, the enemy's pockets, the capacity doubles in size, which the DM ruled was the centipede's intestines. And so he's like, no, I want something that's actively detrimental to it. And so he wound up stuck with the third one, which is it's fireproof to it's immune to everything but fire damage. And we had exactly one fire weapon, and it was the rogue's hand axe or something that did a D6. It's amazing we survived that fight. It was a disaster. I ran away the entire time. I couldn't do shit. I was like a rogue myself. Okay. Hey, catfolk had 40-foot speed in 3.5, so when I ran.
Okay. So running to 5th edition,
Fifth edition
Good
is
segue on
yeah.
my part.
We're
Um,
great at segues.
so, fifth edition, there's a lot to like about fifth edition. Fifth edition um, compares, it's hard to make a direct comparison to first edition, and I tend to think of
You
fifth
really can't.
edition. Well, I tend to think of fifth edition more in how it compares to 3.5, but in terms of first edition had a certain amount of simplicity in that, this was before the days of expansion after expansion after expansion. You had core rules.
DMG,
There were,
bestiary.
yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that you could do with it. It was all shiny and new and fun, and I mean, there were some crazy mechanics that everybody ignored, like weapons against armor class. Like an individual weapon would have to hit modifiers against different armor types and whether there was a shield. So if there was a ridiculous table of this weapon against this armor class has this penalty or this
Somebody
bonus.
got a little too realistic
Uh,
with
uh,
it.
right. I mean, they went absolutely nuts with that. So that was a page out of the, I believe that was in the player's handbook, not the Dungeon Master's Guide, but that was a page that everybody sort of glossed over. Um, and it's nice that future editions got rid of the THAC0 to hit armor class 0 and started doing armor class in a more logical way.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of sort of the mechanics were never simple, but in terms of a certain amount of simplicity so you could focus on playing and focus on fun and focus on role play while still having plenty of hack and slash and plenty of
Opportunities
treasure
to.
and rewards and opportunities. I think 5th edition compares very favorably to first. There are things about 5th edition. I was playing 5th edition, well, really since it came out until just recently, and then went back to 3.5 for a little bit recently. There are things that make sense about 5th edition, but sort of cut both ways. I like the concept of proficiency bonus and making a lot inherent to the character, him or herself. Um,
That one was nice,
because,
yeah.
well, a 20th level character stripped of all their gear still has a lot of inherent power,
Hmm.
and isn't reliant on gear. And now you have gear that
Yeah,
maxes out at, +3.
and
Um,
because it was a favorite mechanic of some of the meaner DMs I know in Pathfinder and 3.5 to strip you if nobody was playing a monk, and people rarely did, because monks, you need to be too high in too many stats. They would strip you of your gear, and you can't do shit without
but
all your bonuses.
but at the same time, when you essentially, by rules as written, by balance, and every edition after first put a lot of emphasis into balance. And you start giving +1 weapons already to your second, third level character, and you're already unbalancing it. And because really that shouldn't come around until 5th, and then 11th, 12th, you get the +2, and then finally at 16th, you get +3. And there's just not, I found in playing 5th edition, especially playing longer term campaigns and taking characters through level after level, we weren't a Monty Hall group. It wasn't that, that everybody was just, doing a Munchkin and min max and everything like that. But you go out and in any given session, you like the shiny new toys at the end of it. Um,
I do
and
remember you really favored loot.
eh, well, and there was something missing, and also I didn't like the way that I really liked having the customization of not just skills but feat in
I do
3.5,
miss feats, yeah.
and really, who's going to give up the ability point bonus for feet in fifth edition. And so after playing fifth edition, really since it came out up until 6 months ago, I felt like there were things I was really missing about 3.5, sort of missing that whole range of, +1 through +10,
So
magic items.
you basically
And,
went from first to fifth to 3.5.
yeah, to a large degree in terms of, because I never played second edition that much. And fourth was just awful. So that's largely true. I went 1.35 and only recently back to 3.5. And 3.5 was both as good as I remembered it and much worse than I remembered it.
It's kind of unwieldy.
It is. It is fun running characters through and having more options with loot and gear, and I don't mind the fact that the math starts adding up. But
That's because you're good at
but
math.
but what but what I enjoyed about feat and the customization, I realized quickly that suddenly, oh, there's a whole lot more things to keep track of, and watching my players, make characters was just it was.
It got messy.
It got messy. A lot more work involved, a lot more for me to keep track of, to the point where I just sort of gave up keeping track. And I'm like, okay,
You
if
guys can do this.
if they're fudging, or if there's an extra +1 here, an extra +1 in edition 3.5 makes absolutely no difference whether their bonus on a skill is +23 or +24. Um,
Yeah, skill
and
bonuses
and
get
so
insane.
and so after going back to 3.5 for a while, I sort of renewed my appreciation for fifth edition, but maybe with the idea of doing some more house rules in terms of capturing a couple of the things that I liked about 3.5, rather than reverting back to 3.5.
Well, one of the great things about Pathfinder is its easy ability to hybridize with 3.5, so it's more streamlined. Like like I gave the example with the perception skill being split apart in 3.5. Um, but you can hybridize it because it's so easy to apply your favorite things about 3.5 to Pathfinder without becoming super bloated. I mean, Pathfinder has more recently started to become it's they're coming up with their Unearthed Arcana and this expansion and that expansion, but you don't have to use these expansions, and you can also streamline things more. So it was one of my favorite things. One of my favorite things that DMs would do, because one of my first groups, the group I've long since left because it was also filled with terrible people, was we had religious 3.5ers, and we had people who just adored Pathfinder, and we would frequently have DMs who just combined the two, and you sort of got the best of both worlds. The math didn't add up as much. There wasn't as much stacking, but you still got the fun equipment and the ridiculous bonuses without having to keep track of quite so many things.
I I was one of the people who stuck the D&D route and put up with fourth edition for a little while. Maybe I was loyal to D&D because I started with first edition, or whatever. But I've never played Pathfinder. Friends I have who have played, I, you talk about it being streamlined, and I
It's
believe
I'm
you
not.
that
It's not.
the
It's
people
not. I
can
wouldn't call it
streamline it.
streamlined. I would say it's more streamlined than 3.5, but that doesn't make it in and of itself streamlined.
But I feel like everybody I've known who's played Pathfinder and talks about the campaigns they're in, the characters they're making, they're making these bizarre hybrid classes with monster races
I
and
mean, that's more for like goofball campaigns and stuff.
well, I just it must lend itself very well to goofball
Oh, it
campaigns.
does.
That already know a lot of goofballs because
I wouldn't be surprised.
that was sort of the impression I got of where Pathfinder sort of led to, was that every time I would be in a conversation with people talking about their Pathfinder campaigns, it was just these
Ridiculous.
ridiculous hybrids of classes with monster races with just more and more
I mean, the
out there
monster races
bizarre.
were pretty more. We're actually we're a lot more customizable to becoming player races, and you didn't have to wait for like the way you do with 5e. You didn't have to wait for the Volos guide to pull. You didn't have you couldn't. It was a lot harder to just pull something out of the bestiary and make it into a player race, but in 5e, and in Pathfinder, since the monsters were basically written up the same way as an NPC or a very basic version of a player character, it was pretty easy to customize it. And I remember an online campaign I played in, our Easter holiday one-off was this improvised thing where we were just fighting super evil bunnies, and like everybody got to be a monster race, and somebody was a phoenix, and somebody else was I cannot remember. It's something in Charybdis. What's the first one? Scylla? Scylla? Why am I asking you? You don't even know how to pronounce Mythos. Um, I've never heard anybody else say Mythos. That's Have you never spoken to anybody about Call of Cthulhu before?
Probably not.
Okay.
So
It does lend itself well to goofball campaigns, but I think people are just trying to tell you that in an attempt to get you into it.
one of the best things or best rumors, I should say, that I just recently heard about 5th edition is that they may finally be coming out with Eberron for 5th edition.
Eberron. That's one of the classic settings, right?
No, no, no. It was a started with 3rd edition. No, yeah, started with 3rd edition, and they had, I think, a competition that of world building, and one guy won and built the world of Eberron.
So it's a
And
world
it's
setting.
it's a world setting. And it's a neat setting in 3.5. So if they come out, if they are in fact coming out with it for 5th edition,
That would be exciting.
check it out.
All right. I think we kind of covered everything. So if you enjoyed this video, check out more content in the links in the description below for the Dungeon of Bad Decisions Discord server and for my blog, where I post quotes, anecdotes, and photos from the tabletop games I play in at the dungeonofbaddecisions.tumblr.com, and to support my Patreon. Special thanks to Crunchy Chompy for being a commenter patron, and to Polyjon and Tark for being average adventurers. Click here to check out the rest of the series, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Roll 20s, y'all.